officially starting the stream, so you're just going to smile for a second. Quiet on the set, please. We're live.
Hello, SunSentinel.com audience. Welcome to our roundtable on all things Uber. If you haven't heard, Uber is a car service that's really popular with a lot of people here in Broward, except maybe our local lawmakers. Today we have a great panel to talk about what's going on with Uber and Broward and Uber in the future. Right to my immediate left, we have County Commissioner Chip LaMarca. Good to have you. We have John Camillo,
Thank you, Dave.
President of Yellow Cab. We have Josh Tifo. And Josh, would you tell the audience who you are?
I'm the South Florida Director for Turning Point USA. We're a student activism group that stands for limited government, free market capitalism, and really giving college students a voice here in South Florida.
And also we have Daniel Ruas.
Yes, I'm chairman of the Florida Federation of Young Republicans. Obviously, our group is 18 to 40, so I represent young Republicans all the way from Miami-Dade County through the Panhandle.
These people are powerful. How I made the panel, I'm not sure yet. But we're going to have a lively, if not civil, conversation about, like I said, all things Uber. And if you have been living under a rock, let me just explain that. Last fall, Uber showed up in Broward, unannounced, in the dark of night. I kid about that. But they showed up and started operating. Broward County said, fine, if you're going to be here, we have regulations. They're called taxi laws. We need you to follow those. Uber says, no, no, no. We're an app company. We're a TNC, a transportation network company. We don't own cars. We just connect riders with those that do have cars. So Broward says, fine, we'll create a TNC regulation. And they passed that, one of the toughest in the nation. Uber said, nope, don't like that either. And once it was passed, Uber pulled out of Broward. And while it still serves, technically serves Miami-Dade and Palm Beach, Broward is that big hole in the donut. And we're wondering what's going to happen now. We have a historic vote tomorrow night with the county commission. And I think, like I said, we're going to bring up everything. There's lawsuits, there's charges of unfair laws leaning towards one versus the other. But the big question I'm wondering is, does Broward need Uber as much as Uber needs Broward? Because how can you say you're serving South Florida if you don't serve Broward? So let's get into it. Chip, can we catch people up? If I have it right, a couple of months ago before the summer break, the commission passed some of the toughest regulations in the country. And the regulations, the three of the key ones, were demanding that the Uber drivers have 24-hour insurance, that they register with the county, and that they undergo FBI background checks. Maybe the gold standard, some say, of background checks. You guys passed that. Uber said nope and pulled stakes. And then what happened? You guys came back from the break and things started to change.
Right. Well, so we decided last year, end of last year, getting into this year, that we should create an ordinance as was requested by folks like Uber and Lyft. You know, they said, well, we want to be regulated. If we're going to be regulated, we should have a category. So we started down that process, being very clear with folks that are out there. Miami-Dade does not have an ordinance. It's the wild, wild west down there. Palm Beach County has basically, they had a temporary operating agreement, and they just punted the ball down the field when they saw all the fun that was going on in Broward, so they have a temporary agreement. Here we are in the middle trying to figure out what's fair and equitable and really use common sense to have an ordinance that allows them to operate, people to be safe, and the free market to take care of the rest. The reason that they left at the end of July, unfortunately we were on summer break like you said, the reason they left is the commission voted 7-2 to do a legal injunction, which that is basically why they left. They did not want to be sued. They did not want to be in the middle of a lawsuit.
You put a big hammer over their head.
Yeah.
Okay. And they said, we're out of here.
Correct. It was myself and one other commissioner that didn't support that, and that was the gist of why they physically left.
And I think we'll hear a little bit about that, but a mob formed. The Uber army began to call and email and visit your house in the night. Well, I'm kidding about the night stuff. Uber does not do that. But
no, the neighbors do.
The neighbors do. But you got an onslaught, right? I mean,
well, you know, there were a number of ways they contacted commissioners. They called, they emailed, they did a petition drive. The petition drive was somewhere around 60,000 or 70,000 written petitions. They sent a couple of very large FedEx boxes to every office. I had already received phone calls and emails, responded to every one of those emails. which was a fun way to spend my summer break. But the bottom line is, it was important for me to let people know how I felt about it, and it wasn't necessarily what was being portrayed necessarily in the county level. We all don't agree on it. At that point, we didn't. But there's more of a unified thought on how to move forward with it. But yeah, they did. They used the.
They
power
launched
of-
the Army, right? And so after that, you guys came back, and it became more of a, hey, whatever you want, Uber, loosey-goosey sort of. I kid, but seriously,
Well,
you killed all those three
So
back,
the
right?
background check, right? We're basically at the point where we said, you know what? We've never done level 2 background checks. The rides for hire, the taxi cabs, the limousines, the shuttles have never done that. It was never required at Broward County. Why
But this
should
is
we
this is
start it now?
2015. I mean, we never had TNCs a year ago. Seems like.
But a driver in one is a driver in another is a human being. Why does it require a different level of background check? So
How about
to-
both
to-
sides do FBI background checks?
Well, that was where it came. That's where we came to, and there was pushback.
Okay, all right. What about insurance? What was the problem there?
Insurance. So this is an evolving industry, as I've seen. You know, I certainly don't work in the industry, but I use the service, and I understand that when the app is on, they're covered by their Uber policy.
Right.
So if you're driving the kids to school, and then you're drop the kids off, and you get a ride, and you're an Uber driver, comes on your phone, and you pick somebody up. At that point, the service will cover your insurance, but it doesn't cover your insurance when you're driving the kids to school or going to the grocery store after that. So it's.
So what did Broward want in that instance?
Initially, we wanted 24/7 commercial insurance, which, to be honest with you, is what we have, in commercial situations like the port and the airport with commercial vehicles. These aren't. This is also someone's personal vehicle as well as their commercial vehicle while they're driving it, and that issue, the insurance issue, really is something I believe, and John may agree, needs to get resolved in Tallahassee. You know, they need to have a statewide answer for this. I mean, this is the first time that the Broward County Commission is asking for the state to preempt them.
That's funny. That is a story.
That's true.
And then there was something about I call it like getting married, where you your partner wants you to go and get a actual official county license, register with the county. You want an Uber to do that. You want an Uber to commit to.
Well, they're a business. They need to. I mean, every business who operates in Broward County should be registered and decide what the fee is for that company to operate there, based on service and exposure. In their case, number of rides and all that type of thing.
But they don't want to do that.
They've agreed to do that. They've agreed to register. They
And
haven't
they'll
yet.
register the names of the drivers.
They will register the company with a number of drivers, and they will maintain the records. The records will be subject to biannual audit. If we have a law
Is
enforcement
that the
reason,
same
we get
with
that
taxis? Do taxi drivers, do they submit their full names? We'll find out.
They have, they have all their records on file.
Okay, so
This become from the technology standpoint. This is to them anyway. It's become a trade secret issue. So if I know who's working here at the Sun Sentinel and I had all the employees and I want to start a newspaper across the street, I can just go, okay, well, Daniel's
well,
here.
I'm Daniel
Sarah's
Vasquez from the Sun Sentinel. I don't mind telling you. All right, but you pulled back on all three of those, but that wasn't good enough for Uber. Uber still says what? They were supposed to. I thought you had said that they were going to come back that day. You guys said you're going to change those rules, but that didn't happen.
It did not happen.
What did happen?
This issue has continued to go on. We have moved forward.
This is like West Side Story. I'm telling you, this is it's intriguing, and there's a lot at stake.
I would tell you that
complex.
I've used the service all over the country. I would tell you the service is excellent. The company is not much of a company to deal with as far as I'm concerned. I have not had the level of success dealing with them as people who give you their word.
Well, it's
the
funny-
other company is actually doing a good job so far, though.
It's funny you mention that, because Uber, I mean, there's Lyft too, if I don't know if you've heard that, but there is another company, there's another competitor, and there's a couple of smaller competitors, but all you hear about, I believe, is Uber. I mean, once you go Uber, you don't go back. I'm sure you heard that a million times. Uber is, it's known for quick service, cheaper fares, great cars, friendly drivers. So people can't get enough of Uber, and I guess you guys got a taste of that.
They're the Kleenex in this brand.
They're the
category,
Kleenex.
Band-Aid, Kleenex. I mean, they say Coke or whatever the brand is.
It's
but
Uber
it's a
now,
ride.
right?
It's a ride service. And there are other ones than Uber.
You're right. We just don't hear about them much. But now, taxis have served the communities across the country for eons, and provided a service that a lot of individuals and families relied on. So they made the market. I think some people might argue that taxi companies gave away the industry to Uber. Uber took advantage of the things that people didn't like about taxis. People complain that taxis can be expensive. It takes a long time to get a ride. You're not sure what kind of car you're going to get. It goes on like that. But I know, John, you've been in communication with me a lot, and you're a very fair person. I know you know what's going on here. Tell us why you say Uber's operating unfairly in town, and tell us and make your case for cabs.
Well, Uber's not operating in town. Okay, the question is, Uber will come back. What's going to be the regulatory scheme? How are they going to be required to operate? And I want to talk a little bit about what was passed and what's anticipated.
Okay.
Initially, what was passed were a set of regulations that hours were spent discussing. I'm going to talk about insurance first. Actually, the county doesn't have the right to preempt the state. The state sets out, this is the insurance requirement for hire vehicles. If there's a question, that has to be answered at the state level. The county can't change state law on what insurance is required, and the only thing the ordinance required was that everybody comply with state law. Very simple. The level twos, I'm an advocate for level twos.
That's the FBI background checks?
That's the fingerprint background check, and I'm an advocate for it. Wasn't allowed in the state of Florida for taxi cab or for hire drivers until 2013. It has to be done by the state or by an agency of the state, which would be the county. It is the gold standard, and whether or not the county decides that Uber self-regulates its drivers or the county requires Uber drivers be regulated by the county, including a list of drivers, I still think that it is good policy that cab drivers have a level 2, and I have asked commissioners, including Commissioner LaMarca, to maintain that in the ordinance as a survivor of whatever happens tomorrow.
So cabs are required to go through FBI right now or not?
Right now, the ordinance was amended after it was allowed by law in April to require all for-hire drivers to go through level 2s.
And I get confused. Is Uber for hire or
Yes,
not
it's a
for hire?
It's a for-hire driver under Florida statute.
But they don't-
A for-hire service under level 2.
But they don't
under
follow
Florida
that
statute.
rule. They don't.
Well, at this point in time, they're not here because they didn't want to follow that rule. And they don't want their drivers to be fingerprinted. As a matter of fact, the ordinance that's being suggested tomorrow would allow somebody who was somebody who had sexually abused a child, convicted 8 years ago, to get out of prison tomorrow and start driving an Uber vehicle. That's the latest amendment from Uber.
Are you sure about that?
Yes,
that sounds a
I'll-
little simplistic.
I will send you the.
I do have a question, which is,
Well, let me respond.
we'll get into you in a second.
Respond, okay? I appreciate it, Dan. And that's what Uber is now proposing.
Because Uber goes back 7 years in their records?
They go back 7 years, and they don't check when somebody has been released from prison.
And then an FBI background check would capture that.
An FBI in Los Angeles and in San Francisco, the state's attorneys have sued Uber for misrepresenting the efficacy of their background checks, including and here's one of the holes in the type of background check they do. If you do the level 1, I tell you where I've lived. So if I tell you I lived in Georgia and I lived in Broward County, but I forgot to tell you that I lived in Jacksonville where I was arrested, they don't go back and check that. So the level 2 actually goes and it checks with the FBI on arrests, where people have been arrested. I've been in meetings with Uber. Uber's complaint isn't that it isn't accurate or it doesn't capture all arrests. What they have a problem with, according to what they told the Palm Beach County Commission, is that oftentimes people are arrested and not convicted, but they get fingerprinted, and there is a problem with not clearing the arrests.
There's a backlog.
Well, not just that. It may be that somebody's arrest record comes up. In Broward County, the way the ordinance was written, it would only count convictions against somebody who was applying. Whether or not that's what the commission wants relative to TNC drivers, I still would like to see that for other for-hire drivers.
Just quickly, I think people like to have the gold standard, but there's always a price for that gold standard. You say you want the cabs to do that now, the FBI background checks. You haven't done it for years. Is there a problem? I mean, has
Well,
cabs
it was
been...
because it wasn't allowed until 2013. And then when it was finally passed out of the state legislature, I actually contacted staff because they began moving forward in Palm Beach County, Hillsborough County, and I said, let's do it here in Broward. And their response was, we're going to look at the entire ordinance, and so let's not piecemeal the ordinance. Let's go ahead and look at the ordinance in its entirety and include that in there, which is what happened in April. But I was an advocate for almost 2 years before it was passed. I do believe it's the proper thing to do, but it wasn't allowed until 2013 in the state, and that's why it wasn't being done.
Okay.
You know, technology is great. Technology has now allowed people to go to UPS, get their fingerprints taken. Fingerprints get routed to the FDLE, and the reports go back to whatever agency's asking for it. I recently had to have my fingerprints taken in an insurance matter. I went into a UPS. I paid the UPS fee, whatever it was, $25, and it turned out that, you know, whatever it was, got sent to the state of Florida, and I got cleared that way. It's very convenient. It's not very costly, and it works. And so we were an advocate for that. The other thing which the ordinance did require, which apparently it's not going to require, is that drivers get licensed by the county, and additionally that the drivers' vehicles get registered with the county. That's important because under Florida's financial responsibility law, the driver is the one who's responsible for complying with the insurance requirements set out, or the owner of the vehicle. Okay, and the only way that this county will ever know if in fact that person has insurance that complies with financial responsibility is to have a list of the vehicles and to be able to get the policies that cover those vehicles to ensure that they do comply with the financial responsibility law. So for example, in our case, if we have a vehicle that's covered, or if our vehicles are all covered under our policy, if for some reason our policy was canceled, the county is what we call a certificate holder. The county gets notice immediately that there's a problem with our policy, so it can take action. Under the current ordinance, the way it's being proposed, county won't know whether there is or isn't proper insurance on the cars that need to have compliance with financial responsibility. So that's where we sit. Now, what I say is that Uber's here, or TNCs are here. They're here to stay. I understand that. We're going to have to compete with them on the street. I think it's up to the county to decide what the regulatory scheme looks like at the end of the day, and whether or not this regulatory scheme makes sense.
Well, I think part of the issue here is that Uber, because it's innovative, because it's broken new ground, and because the public loves their product, they're saying it's got to be a different scheme. Don't treat us like taxis. That's the heart of Uber's argument, I believe. You guys want to jump in and say what you think about Uber?
All I know about Uber is a lot of what I've heard from students around South Florida. I've spoken with hundreds of students at Nova, at FAU, and to them it's an innovative service. It's a service that costs less money. It's a service that, quite frankly, when they are intoxicated and they need a ride.
I hear this one a lot.
And this is one that I've heard on the news. I thought it was a talking point until I talked to dozens of students who told me this, that there are times that students are too drunk to make a phone call to look up what the taxi's number is. A lot of the students don't have the taxi app, but with Uber, you pre-make the account, you go out with your friends. It's really helping a lot of students around South Florida get home safely, and I think that's something that shows the urgency that we need to have in passing this, just because we've had this 2-month gap. We've had students that come down to Fort Lauderdale from FAU and struggle getting rides back. I've heard from several students who go down to Fort Lauderdale in an Uber, expect to take an Uber back, and I've heard wild stories of being stuck in front of the bar from 3 to 4 in the morning, and not knowing where the taxi is, where they're going to find them. We've been putting
What did they do a year ago?
Well, part of it is
I hope
just
they didn't get in a car.
Yeah, part of it is just the fact that we had Uber and it was taken away, so the students expected it. The students were used to it.
They got a taste
had the
of
app.
Uber.
They got a taste of Uber, and when students have a taste of Uber, they get used to it. And because I know that we need to make sure to have the right regulations going forward, and I think that this legislation really is going to address that in a lot of ways. We really need to get this passed just to keep our students safe, because every night that we don't have a legislation passed that brings Uber back into Broward County, we're endangering our college students.
Well, let me ask you, the idea of having a couple of Budweisers and then going home with Uber, that comes up. But do they worry, does it matter to them whether the drivers at Uber have FBI or Lyft or any other TNC, if they have FBI background checks or if they have proper insurance, 24-hour insurance? Does that come up? Do they care about that?
That's not, I've had 1 or 2 students ask me about that who are very active politically around here, and really were very informed on the debate. But quite frankly, these kids want to pay $20 getting home from the bar instead of $40, and these kids are much more likely to get in that car drunk when they're paying $40 than $20. And you look at the overarching scope of Uber versus taxi cabs. I know taxi cabs have served this area for 20, 30, even more years, and they've been bringing kids home safe. A lot of the people who are very active politically around here, middle-aged people, they took taxis back when they were in college. But Uber is the future. Uber is taking those kids out of their own cars and keeping drunk drivers off the road. And I think that's why we really need to make sure to pass this in a few days or tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What do you say, Mr.
Well,
Ross?
I think what this really brings up is the whole question of regulation and whether, what place does it have, whether it's local, state, or anything else. And personally, I mean, Uber's coming in. It's, a whole new game that they're bringing to town with this. And I think, the question should not be, should Uber have restrictions put on it, so the same as Yellow Cab. I think it should be that we should be freeing up Yellow Cab to compete on the same level with Uber. I would like to see, my question that I had was when it comes to these level 2 background checks, what exactly disqualifies someone from being able to be a driver for Yellow Cab or Uber at all? I mean, what in the law automatically disqualifies them? Or is this just a choice of your company to do this background check and you can say, well, that we're going to allow this kind of person to be a driver or not allow this person to be a driver?
Well, Dan, the answer is that the ordinance sets out what does or doesn't qualify.
But what I'm asking is, do you have any that go beyond that?
No, we accept the ordinance's
Okay.
decision on that or determination.
You need an ordinance to do that, though, to have a standard for your drivers?
I believe that the ordinance should do that because there is an inherent, well, regulations in the proper context are good. Okay, everybody believes that regulations are good. I could tell you regulations.
Not all.
Well, yeah, not all, and
Some do, right?
I do believe that there is a place for the county to set out what the minimum requirements are for a taxi or for hire driver, and there is a conflict of interest that many companies would have between putting a driver in a car that may not be a safe driver, because drivers, whether they're taxi or they're Uber drivers or independent
But you would want a
contractors.
minimal level, and then you would stick to the minimum level.
Well, let me say this, because our drivers and Uber drivers, we transport drunk people too. We've done it for decades.
He says they transport drunk people too, in case you didn't hear that.
And actually,
He's been following.
we also have, we have a voucher program that we give to bars and police departments to make sure people don't get in their cars, and we've had that for decades too. But putting that aside, there is a minimum standard that we all should follow. We do transport children. We oftentimes have parents call us up because they get stuck at work. Can you get my kid, bring him home, bring him to grandma's house? I think that when you have what is essentially legalized hitchhiking, okay, which is what it is getting...
Uber is legalized hitchhiking.
And so
But
is
at
Yellow
what
Cab.
point do you think that- do
And
a
so is
driver right
Yellow
as a
Cab,
consumer to make that
because you
choice,
have
though?
a stranger who is getting into a car with another stranger. Don't know each other most of the time. And when you have that situation, I believe that there are appropriate minimum standards that government should impose on for hire drivers relative to what type of people
this
should be
isn't-
allowed to drive.
To me, it's like, this came up because Uber was in town and because Uber was the discussion. And it's some say cab companies want to throw in this extra level of security checks because it makes the price for Uber to higher to operate.
well-
and so you're trying to harm them.
Well, Dan, I'm going to answer it a little bit differently. There have always been standards in Broward County, including the minimum requirements for drivers, whether it is what they have in their driving record, speeding tickets and so on, or criminal convictions. I've said it and I'll say it again. If the county determines that Uber shouldn't, or any TNC shouldn't undergo level 2 background checks, I hope that they still maintain those level 2 background checks for cab drivers and other for-hire drivers.
Well, where are we? Tomorrow's vote is important tomorrow night. What are you voting on? And what do you think will happen?
So, just a couple topics on the level 2 background checks, and John's been in this business a long time. If they were legal in 2013, then why didn't the cab companies, the for-hire companies do that until here we are in 2015? This wasn't a suggestion until Uber was here. So there was a two-year gap. I mean,
I do want to correct you on that, though, Chip. I'm going to say it again because I've said it to you in email. I've said it to you in front of the commission. When it was legalized in 2013,
Right.
I brought up with Mona Fandel, who was then directing this, that we needed to do it here in Broward County 2 years before Uber, or a year and a half before Uber began operating in Broward County.
And you said it was because they were changing the ordinance.
It
They wanted
was-
to put it all in.
It was because
But we didn't
they
have
were
Uber
look-
here, so we weren't touching the ordinance.
But why
No,
didn't
but
you
I will
just do
tell you-
it? Why
well,
do you need a law?
Because private industry is not allowed to do level 2 backgrounds. It has to be authorized by the government, and then a governmental agency has to request it.
Okay.
All right.
So there was this question about the type of folks who are driving, excuse me, driving for Uber. I happened to be on the West Coast yesterday for a wedding last night, and Barbara, a grandma, picked me up in a Ford Edge. She drove me from Naples to Marco
Barbara,
Island.
your grandma,
And then
yeah.
Richard, who is a 30-year produce manager at Publix, drove me back. Drove my wife and I back, and it was.
And these weren't guests of the wedding. These are Uber
No,
drivers.
these are Uber drivers.
These are real people.
I ordered I knew there was limited service on the island, so I was not going to get a cab or a ride back. So these are the kind of I have used this service all around the country, and I have found people from all walks of life, people from all places in the world, and the one common thread. Sometimes there'll be inefficiencies of them getting around. I can maybe help out with my map because I'm going the same way. But 90+% of them know where they're going, have a great attitude, offer me a bottle of water, which because I'm paying for it, I can accept it.
That's new for me. Okay.
Offer me a candy or some type of refreshment. The guy at Seattle Airport was very friendly. But the reality is, we have to take companies. Okay, we have to regulate, but we also have to take companies to a degree at their word. And I've asked people, not the representatives of Uber, but drivers and other folks, what's the typical save rate? If all of us went to apply to be an Uber driver, 8 out of 10 would not be accepted. There's this understanding
80% would not be
would
accepted.
not. 7 or 8 out of 10 do not get in. Only about 2 or 3. But the question is, we go back to, okay, it's a terrible thing to think about these. I think there was a mailer actually that went out from Yellow Cab folks trying to scare people in neighborhoods now. Actually, just one went to my office. It was to Commissioner Bogan, his district in Winmore, and basically it was saying there are murderers and axe murderers and rapists driving your family around. Those are crimes that aren't even considered. So what we're talking about loosening up on are if somebody got caught with tax fraud, somebody had a white-collar crime, or something where they were convicted, but not murder, rape, touching, any physical.
But I thought the lawsuits in
type of
LA
things.
and San Francisco had something to do with that the FBI, that the third-party service that Uber uses had let one or two murderers, one or two rapists, and others that had sexual. I think that was something that they're
It could
claiming.
be. You know what? One of the other commissioners on our dais was concerned that Uber doesn't check at least the Florida system for convictions. And it was Commissioner Ritter, and I agree with her. They should do that. They should do that. If someone's living in Florida, they should go back and do that other level of background check. The companies that are doing this, to be very clear, it's not Uber doing a background check of an employee for themselves. It's a third party. Companies such as Checker or there's a couple other ones. There's a few different companies, Hirees. These are companies that do background checks for hotel companies, for retail stores, things like that.
But
So
it seems a little bit different than that. A store clerk or a store employee versus someone who's driving you home when you're drunk at night. Maybe you're a female, maybe you're a young female. I mean, they're going to your house. They know where you live. They can probably tell whether someone is meeting you at the door or not. It's a little bit higher.
You're absolutely right.
The stakes are higher here.
You're absolutely right. And in the current industries that we've regulated and had here in Broward County for decades, there have been incidents where that has happened no matter whether they were background checked or not. There was one that just happened down in Miami. Different company, not John's, but the situation ended up with the cab driver being shot by the police. I mean, we can check everybody out.
So the
At the
answer-
end of the day, we hope human beings will act as they should on this earth and give respect to other folks.
Sure, but
Dan, let me respond to one thing. Even on Hirees' website, which is the company,
Third party.
It's the third party that Uber uses to do its background checks. It acknowledges that the best, most complete way to do a background check is by using the fingerprint method. We had an incident here a year and a half ago, about a year ago, excuse me, where we had a driver who had sexually assaulted a woman. That had we had the current ordinance in place, he never would have been permitted to operate our car. And to be honest with you, I never want to see that again. I don't ever want to see that again in the yellow cab. I hope that nobody ever wants to see that again, Chip.
Well, it almost sounds like.
I
agree with you.
And so, if again, it's a policy question. The policy question
It
is.
sounds like the point is moot, because I think you're saying that, Broward County force us to do, the cabs, force us to do the FAI background checks, but Uber too. But what I think I'm hearing is that that's off the table now. There is not going to be level 2 checks. There's not going to be 24-hour insurance. There's not going to be the same registration with the county that you once wanted. I thought part of that was you wanted to see the list of the driver's names, so you could check you could audit them. But Uber has said, no, we don't want you auditing us. I think you're down to maybe once a year auditing the third-party company, something that sounds.
Twice a year, a company agreed on by our county auditor, Evan Lukic, and the representatives from whatever companies, not just Uber, but any of the other companies, would have that third-party company do a full audit, be able to find names, addresses, people, and if there's anything that has happened where someone's broken the law, absolutely that information can be given.
But let me also respond to that. They had the same requirement in Palm Beach County, where they had an audit requirement, and so they did an audit. And Uber redacted, took out the names, any identifying information out of all the information that Palm Beach County got, said it was a trade secret and refused to give it to them. And California, Uber was fined $7.3 million by the California Public Utility Commission for failing to give data that it had agreed to give when it initially received its TNC license in California. The same happened in New York, and the same happened in Pennsylvania. Now, I understand that we take people at their word and we look at people in good faith, but don't forget now, there's a company that came into Broward County, was advised, didn't come in the dark at night, it actually approached our regulators and said, we're going to come in, and they said, no, you can't come in, you're not going to comply with our ordinance. Came in anyway. There was a cease and desist letter that was sent by the county saying stop operating. It continued to operate. I don't know where good faith starts, but I think good faith should start with people who agree to and abide by the regulations that apply to their industry, and it has not done so. And
Well, you have to be fair that they
don't.
don't see themselves as part of your industry, though.
Well, there is actually, have you read our ordinance at all? Or on the ordinance that
Yes,
was.
but
the
look, I'm
ordinance-
just saying that to be fair, Uber's point is that they are not a traditional cab company, therefore they should not be subject to these kinds of
I
regulations.
at one point.
And up to 80,000 people signed a petition
Well,
saying they agreed with Uber.
I signed it once as Abraham Lincoln and said, joke's on you, Uber. There is no vetting of that. I signed it 6 times just to see if I could, okay? And that I can't tell you, I don't know how accurate the petition was, but I can tell you this, that there are a lot of folks who would like not to pay property taxes. There are a lot of folks who would like not to build buildings and follow the South Florida Building Code or get permits or otherwise. And if I said I'm a mushroom grower, but I'm dispatching taxi cabs, it doesn't mean I'm not regulated. It just means that I'm denying that I should be regulated. And so the point isn't whether or not they want to be regulated or they agree that they should be regulated. The question is, did the ordinance apply to the operation that Uber had here in Broward County? And apparently our county attorney believed that it did, which is why the county attorney sent the cease and desist letter out.
But all of that again might be moot.
It is moot.
Right? And so we got to think about what's going forward here. And I think I'm hearing Uber is the model here. Seems to be a lot of trust and faith in the Uber model because of what it delivers to the consumers. I think you guys have had a lot of anguish about how to negotiate with Uber as an entity beyond whether you agree on regulations or not. They seem like a tough bird to deal with. And then, you're making a lot of valid points, but it's almost at a time when the public is saying, taxi who? And that sounds harsh. and I know you guys serve a lot of people, and you do take the handicap. I think you have the cars prepared to take people who are disabled, and I don't think Uber's meeting you there. There's things you're doing, but really the conversation, the public conversation is we want Uber, and I think I'm hearing we want Uber at all costs. Let's trust
Daniel,
Uber. You guys are saying let's trust Uber to write the books.
Let me just touch on something, and Dan mentioned this before. In my mind, this issue has been decided by the free market, by the people who live here. As long as they're kept safe and that it's a reliable service, they should be able to have it. At the same time, the second phase of this is I agree that we need to look at the taxi industry and say, you know what, we shouldn't tell you what to charge anymore. You're going to charge what is successful for you to run your business. If Uber's charging $1.25 a mile and you're charging $2 because Broward County told you, well, shame on us. We should update that ordinance. We shouldn't also limit taxi cabs companies on how many cars they can have on the road. It was a certain number per 1,000 people in Broward County. We have 1.8 million people now. That's the old way of thinking. I believe they should be able to buy new and other cars. A lot of the cars they bought now are the hybrids, and I mean they certainly are trying to upgrade their fleet, and the technology is there. So
Their game is upped.
Well, and one of the other things
Through competition.
Yeah, but
Competition.
through and the other side of it is initially early on, the way I saw this when this first came was Dade, Broward, Palm Beach should sit down. Each manager and attorney should sit down as a region with almost 6
This is that common sense thing you were talking about?
Yeah, gets lost in
Okay.
government. But we should have a framework that's very similar for the 3 counties, so that when someone's in Deerfield Beach and they go to Boca in an Uber, they figure that relatively confident they can get a ride back. From the standpoint of the other issues with the cabs, it's technology where we should have been able to put them on the Uber app or the Lyft app, and they should be able to do the same thing in New York and Washington D.C. You can get a taxi cab through the Uber app, and sometimes if it's not surging, it's a better deal.
And Dan, I'm gonna address that. I asked Uber in 2013 when it was operating in Dade County, come to Broward. We'll let you go ahead and have access to our taxi cabs. You can do the Uber taxi here. Now I do
You were
want to
giving away the shop?
No, why shouldn't we? Our drivers are all independent contractors. The more business they get, the better they are to pay what they owe us, but also to live a lifestyle that means or makes sense to them. Our drivers are professional. Over 70% of our drivers have been driving for more than 10 years at Yellow Cab, and almost 85 have been driving for over 5 years. And so the more business they get, the better they can live, the more of the American dream they can realize. And so I've never been adverse to Uber coming into town and to operating in taxi cabs. The technology is something that we've had in our cars. It's just locating a vehicle with a GPS and sending the closest car to a passenger by address. We've had that technology in our cars since 2003. And if you go to the App Store, you'll see that we actually published an app to hail a taxi before Uber became a company. In 2010 is our first.
I think Uber's
Needs
got a
some
lot
work.
more going for
It needs
itself
some
than,
work.
than the app.
And so people were going to have choices, and people may choose to use Uber, and if they do, and we can't compete with them, then that's our problem. Okay, one of the things we talk about deregulation, and we start. I think you mentioned pricing. What does that look like? How does that look like in Broward County? We get to charge what we want. What happens at the airport when we have 50 to 70,000 people going through on a ship weekend? Does that mean people walk up and negotiate pricing on the curb with cab drivers?
I think Uber does that with price
Perhaps.
surging.
Your company would do it.
Our company would do it. So you might have a yellow cab, and then the next one might be a Broward taxi, and you're telling me that then the people who are behind the first cab in line, who can't get out until the first cab in line is loaded and gone, may charge a lower price? I don't know how it works. I think that there's a lot more to what the regulations do for the county than just the platitude of let's deregulate, let the free market dictate. That's a wonderful platitude, but how does it work in reality? And I think people need to spend some time understanding an industry before they actually can sit there and say,
I think
this regulation works and
That's
this
a
one
great
doesn't.
point. That's a great point.
The
because-
reality is that maybe we don't need to understand the industry. The free market has put us at this table today.
John, I have a question for you.
That's why we're here.
When you walk out of Fort Lauderdale Airport, how many cabs do you see there on a normal day?
It would depend upon what day it is.
Okay, almost every time I've come out of FLL, I've seen sometimes a dozen, sometimes 2 dozen cabs that are waiting there for people. And I know that makes a lot of people say, oh great, I can always get a cab. That's wasted utility. That is somebody sitting there who's not making money from a ride. You mentioned earlier the way that Uber does pricing. Uber does pricing based on demand. It's supply and demand. It's essentially applying a free market model, letting the forces of supply and demand for ride sharing dictate that. That is something that taxi drivers do not have. Those are rides that your drivers are not making money on that they could be if they were driving for Uber.
Okay, let me segue into, and I'll tell you right now that the pricing model for a cab driver is such that they can make more money driving a cab, and I could demonstrate that to you. But let me step you back. You know, one of the things, if you look at our regulations, that we're required to have is a meter. Every one of our cars is required to have a meter. The meter is regulated by the Department of Agriculture Division of Weights and Measures. So for us to do surge pricing would mean that we'd have to bring in every car and our fleet and change the meter. We have to touch it physically. Okay. So how can you surge price? It takes us 8 days to change the meters in our fleet.
It sounds to me like you're in a very poor position to compete with Uber then.
Well, no, I'll tell you what. The ordinance right now requires that we run a meter, and there are about 3 pages of what the meter should do and what it should say. I do believe that people coming from out of town are going to expect metered taxi cab service. Not everybody uses Uber.
But wouldn't lifting that requirement and then perhaps going to an app-based system like Uber, wouldn't that be helpful for that transition?
I have that technology now. I happen to think it's illegal. And I don't want to end up, and the reason I think it's illegal is because Florida statutes does not permit it.
This is why we have a lawsuit, right?
Which is why we have a lawsuit that we filed up in Tallahassee against the Department of Agriculture to ask them to tell us, are they required to regulate the app-based meter? Okay. Right now, the way I read it, they are, and it's like the scales in a Publix or the fuel pumps at a gas station. Every one of those is regulated because the statute says any instrument used to measure for commerce must fall within these regulations. Regulations are required to adopt national regulations. If you talk to the national body, they have not yet approved the cell phone meter as a means of measuring. And so I don't believe it complies with Florida statute. And at this point in time, I don't want to expose our company to running an illegal
Once
meter.
again, I'm just noticing a fundamental disagreement between everyone here, which is you want more laws, another regulation, a clarification, and I just want to lift them up and let you compete on an even level with Uber.
Okay, and so what that would mean is that the legislature would have to
Because we're
address
talking about
that.
Uber may be gone in 5 years.
Uber
There
may
may
be
be
gone.
5 competitors coming down the
And it
pike.
may
We
be-
don't know.
And it may be there's completely new technology that we haven't even imagined. Okay, what
Which
I'm
perhaps a
saying,
company with your resources
Here's what I
could
wonder.
be on the
You
cutting
know,
edge of.
you guys have basically said to the public here, you're getting what you wanted. We tried to wrangle. There was some, but Uber's winning the war, and the PR war. I wonder if cabs go away, and I know it's again it's a harsh thing to say. They say newspapers are going to go away all the time. If that happens, though, what are we left with? An Uber or an Uber-like company that now, without cabs, the competition's gone, and now that pride searching might happen more. We might have paid drivers less. We might end up with a less competitive competition.
Doesn't the market dictate that there's a
was gonna
void,
say, we do-
something's going to fill it?
We deal with this in
You
the
know, I had
airline
a few-
industry all the time. Someone goes out of business. Well, certainly there's an advantage for existing companies to raise prices, but eventually the void is filled.
But with Uber, you have to have a credit card. I know this came up in your commission meetings. Consumers told you, I don't have a credit card. I can't use Uber, or they don't go in my neighborhoods, or
Who can't get a credit card?
some people don't have credit cards.
So
PayPal?
if you have even if you have a situation where you need a hand from the federal government, they issue you a card and it actually happens to be a debit card. So you
Yeah,
can have a
and-
credit
So
card.
you're saying
and wait a minute, Chip. I don't know if you've talked to staff, but they actually tried to register one of those and it wouldn't work with the
What
Uber
about gift
platform.
cards?
Okay. No, I don't know whether you can do a gift card, but the government issued cards don't work with the Uber platform. Here's the thing,
I don't think
guys.
that's true, but
Well, that's
I'll
what
talk to staff. But
Yeah,
I know from a
ask,
federal
ask,
level, they've mentioned
that there's a lot of
ask
hands in that
staff
pot.
if that works or not. Here's the thing. Broward County and many counties here in the state of Florida have really poor public transportation. Okay? I asked this, and I've said
Private.
this to you, huh?
And no.
I've asked this. In Broward County, the single place that calls for more taxi cabs than any other location, actually gets them with our dispatch center and calls, is the Walmart on State Road 7 in Lauderdale Lakes, historically. And the reason is that there are a lot of people who are unbankable. And by the way, I sat as the Department of Agriculture's appointee to the Transportation Disadvantage Commission statewide for years. I happen to have a little bit of a background in transportation disadvantage transportation. And, there are folks who just are unbankable. It's great for us to sit here because we have credit cards. I have a credit card. I actually have an Uber account. I've used Uber.
But you can use Uber. You can use Uber or you can use a taxi, right? It's a choice.
Well, it gets to Dan's point. What happens if taxis disappear? And I don't think taxis will disappear.
Right, I don't either. But
I think what you'll see is a different environment. It may be, and for years Yellow Cab has been accused of being a monopoly here in Broward County, even though it wasn't. It may be that it will be Yellow Cab and TNCs because the smaller cab companies without the technology or the number of cars or whatever the case may be can't compete. It may be that that's what we end up with here in Broward County. But I think there's more to what the regulations require and whether they're good or bad. And before we sit here and say, let's deregulate, let's go through the regulations. What was the purpose? Because these regulations weren't enacted in a week. Most of the regulations were enacted at times over the last 40 years. Let's look at what the regulations do require. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the House last year in its Uber bill in Florida actually required level 2 backgrounds of all TNC drivers. That was the.
But it went nowhere.
Well, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
what
I'm
I
already
think.
hearing that's out.
Pardon me?
I've heard that that's going to fall out.
Well, I happen to have met with the proponent of the bill, Matt Gates, last week, and he told me that he doesn't think it's out. He says at this point in time,
That's news.
I spent an hour and a half with him last week. He says that that it passed on the floor, and he doesn't see any change in the makeup of the legislature. There has been no election since then.
I will be impressed if that
And
goes all the
he
way
says
through.
that he doesn't know that that will come out because there was clearly something that did pass last year with Republican support and on the House.
So that's good. So
Or-
Yellow Cab would be in favor of a preemption law then, if it just to end the confusion.
It would depend upon what is preempted or not preempted. Here's part of the
Yeah, I'm
problem
not
with
asking
preemption.
specifics,
Yeah.
but just generally.
If you read the preemption law that was being proposed last year, it was way too broad. And I think we were discussing it beforehand. It would, if you read it the way it was proposed last year, prohibit local law enforcement folks from even enforcing parking requirements. Okay, somebody could pull up if they're a TNC and they couldn't get ticketed because they were a TNC. I think that there needs to be some preemption. Clearly on insurance, that should be a statewide issue. With regard to other issues, I think there needs to be local regulation. Look, we are Yellow Cab in Tallahassee, and we are Yellow Cab in Broward County. And I can tell you transportation is local. You cannot, at a regional airport, which has 500,000 people going through it in a year, regulate ground transportation the same way that you regulated at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport, which has, 25 million people going through it.
25 million.
And that also has a port within a mile, and also has the Port of Miami and the Miami International Airport within close proximity. It's just a different animal to regulate for higher transportation up there and down here.
All right, well, listen, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to ask you guys to say, give me 30 seconds on finishing. But before I do that, I just want to make sure our viewers know what's happening tomorrow. What do you see being passed? What does it look like?
So tomorrow is a continuation of the meeting from
The marathon meeting.
September 17th. It was also our final budget hearing, and I would just make a note that the county passed a $4.2 billion budget like that and spent all night on Uber.
That's
It's
true, right? That's
mind-boggling.
literally true.
So we stopped at about 12:15 in the morning on Wednesday morning because it went about 7 hours, and we had gotten through the amendments. We were dealing with the airport agreement, and then once that's done, so we'll take it up at that point. The public's already spoken. I don't know that the mayor is going to open it back up for comment. So we'll probably finish up the airport conversation and then vote on the overall ordinance itself, because we amended it with all
Is
the
there
different
actually an
things.
ordinance left?
Yeah.
The 24-hour insurance is gone, the FBI background checks is gone, the registration with county?
Making sure that people are confident that their driver, that they can be safe, and their driver has had a background check, the car is safe, it meets certain specifications, and that the government's hand isn't on every part of it. Yes, that's what's left. Common sense.
Okay, common sense. What was before, though? Before it was public safety.
Overregulation?
First it was public safety, and then it became innovation, okay, are you happy with what's going to be passed tomorrow?
I will tell you that what's going to be passed tomorrow is something I have to see. I don't know, I'm going to say this. I tried cases in Florida for over 30 years. I probably tried over 150 jury trials, and I found that the jury system is more predictable than the political system. And so
I can't disagree with that.
Until and unless
Thank God for that.
until and unless I actually see what gets passed, I can't address whether it's going to be something we will live with. We're going to have to address regulations after whatever's passed tomorrow.
And I should ask, if what you believe is going to be passed is passed, does Uber come back tomorrow?
That's totally up to them. I'm not doing this. I gave up doing things to see a result the next day.
So they haven't given a nod.
I've pretty much cut off communications with them on these issues. I don't deal directly with lobbyists, so I was dealing directly with Uber. I've had more positive conversations with Lyft. So whether it's an opportunity here.
Gotta
Again,
keep
there's that
remember-
void.
gotta remember.
What if Uber doesn't come back on Wednesday? What if Lyft decides to come here? Well, look at a market they're going to be looking at too.
I know. I wonder when Lyft will become more of the conversation, and/or the future companies that you
I
mentioned
would
might
assume
pull in.
that they're going to go through the application process, get their permit, and then begin operating after they go through that process.
And we're already hearing grumblings that the application process might be onerous. I've had a couple.
They don't have an application in and completely done like this in Palm Beach County, and they continue to operate under a temporary agreement.
Right.
Palm Beach. That's what I'm saying. The three counties, to me, it's like, Uber came, there was consternation. Do we regulate? Do we not regulate? Is it a taxi? All that was going on. And then Broward, I think, said boldly, rolled up your sleeves and said, we'll tackle it. Let's just come on. Let's just write it down, and we're going to do common sense. And Palm Beach is like, that sounds good. We'll do that too. And then Uber left, and that changed the whole game. And Palm is like, oh, well, maybe not. We're not going to do that after
Miami-Dade,
all.
on the other hand, didn't even take the notepad
And it's
out.
almost like Miami-Dade, wake up. Where are you? You're just dancing. They're not. I don't know where they're at right now. That's not fair. But okay.
Miami-Dade is Miami-Dade.
Miami's different, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's different.
Yeah.
What do you have?
I'm just really hoping that we can pass this tomorrow, because I'm tired of hearing about my friends and the groups they're with, people driving when they shouldn't be driving, not being able to find rides back. Because I know you have an app. I know that you can Google your number and quickly call a cab. I have when I've needed to around this past couple months. But it's time to start giving those students incentives not to drive drunk, because we need an even regulatory state. We need Uber and we need Yellow Cab to be able to compete. I mean, I love that. That's free market capitalism. And it's what we need in this state. Yellow Cab has serviced people for so long, and now Uber has threatened the status quo, but at the same time, they're challenging you to be better. Quite simply, I want our kids to be safe. I want them to have more incentive to get a ride back rather than driving, and they're going to do that with cheaper rides and with easier access.
I swear, I think Uber just became a superhero. Superhero. No, okay. No, that's great. That's an important point, and I do hear that a lot, what you're talking about, what you're speaking to.
My organization has been for Uber, for allowing these transportation companies to come in Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, all these areas. So we definitely do support it here in South Florida. But, I would like everyone to, think about, the regulation in your life from government at all. This is one area where I'd like to see the burden lifted from Yellow Cab to allow them to compete on an even level with Uber. Competition will be good. I believe competition will help, prices. It'll help access. It'll help all these other things. Not everything can be solved overnight. You can't make up a rule for everything until it pops up in front of you. But I think the way to go here is to deregulate, to allow things to open up. I see too much regulation in this county, whether it's transportation companies or perhaps food trucks or everything else. And I would just like people at home to ask, perhaps this could be a start of a deregulation attitude that we start to see in our approach to government, as opposed to having to find a rule for everything. And I can make decisions on my own without a rule from government telling me how.
Well, I've learned a lot from you, but I got to say, what if Uber got into food trucks? What would that look like?
They're already delivering food in other markets.
Right? And when they're giving you candies or so, water?
No, but they're
Yeah, but
actually
they are
delivering
delivering-
food.
No, they're-
They're
they're-
sandwiches,
they're-
pizzas,
They're
and-
delivering food, and they want to go in direct competition now with Federal Express and delivering packages. And
Amazon too.
So,
Amazon.
Mr. Vasquez, do you like all day breakfast from McDonald's?
I love the idea of it.
Okay. I mean, I like a McGriddle now and then. In Miami-Dade, Uber is delivering those for free to get the service started. So
There you
I mean,
go.
talk about, we got these students that already love Uber for bringing them home. They're bringing them McGriddles sometimes to their dorm room.
How do you compete with that?
You
Get hungover in the
cannot.
morning?
Yeah, you can't
breakfast?
compete with this
Relaxing
groundswell.
marijuana laws, so the whole world.
I think the best egg McMuffin is a 2
And we got the
p.m. egg
beach.
McMuffin.
Oh,
Right?
2 a.m.
Wow.
No, but to John's point, I mean, this is where they've started in transportation, but they're going into,
that too,
they
yeah.
want to be in package delivery and this, whether it's a stay-at-home mom or a dad who's got time in between this and that, and he or she's driving, they're also going to be delivering, messaging. How about the legal community? A messenger to drop off your documents from one county to the other. I mean, there are a lot of things you can do, and Yellow Cab can do the same thing.
Daniel, we've had for years restaurants that use us to deliver food because they don't have a delivery mechanism, but they'll call up Yellow Cab and they'll pay the fare to bring it to somebody's house or pay the driver to do it. It's not unique or new to you, Uber. It's something that has been a need out there. Restaurants have done it. Uber
So
is
you've
now
led the
trying-
way.
Yeah,
And delivery dudes.
And Uber came.
and that's okay. I mean, look, I'm not objecting to competition. I just think that we need to have reasonable regulations. And I think at that point in time, once we get reasonable regulations that not just protect companies, I don't think that's what the purpose of regulation should be, but instead to protect the public. But you really need to understand what the purpose of the regulations are in order to determine whether they're good or bad.
Mr. LaMarca, last comment?
Voting yes.
Yes, voting yes. All right, that's for tomorrow night.
Yes, common sense.
We got a yes. All right, so that meeting should go by pretty quickly.
Yeah, sure. He's one of 8 up there. I feel like I've been outnumbered. I'm in your place today, right, Chip?
Well, one of 9, and
Yeah, one
and we
of
still
9.
have 2 to 3 solid no votes. So that should carry the conversation on for longer than it probably
Yeah,
needs
you're
to.
gonna get your money's worth at tomorrow's meeting.
But as the only Republican up there, I feel like I'm outnumbered here today. I'm like,
I think we agree on in concept that the market and exactly what I've heard from
all of us.
deregulation on some things should be, let's make sure that they're not put in a box. I mean, especially with the quantity vehicles, because you and I have talked about that. You should be able to invest in your business.
Well, call me cynical, but I also think what I've heard is public. You ask for it, and you're going to get it. You're going to get Uber Extreme. It's been a crazy saga. I think we've broken it down. This was a fantastic panel. We covered Uber. We covered murder. I think there was something about medical marijuana. There was drinking.
McDonald's.
We gave you plenty.
McDonald's.
McDonald's.
Just a little plug.
We broke some news. Mr. Gates, what you said about Mr. Gates and where he's going. So just
I'm not saying he's going to. I don't think he knows that he has the votes because the votes haven't changed since last year. There's no new members of the House. There hasn't been an election.
that's true.
Yeah, we're not going to know until.
Yeah, and and so who knows what's going to happen? Like I said, it's very unpredictable.
That's right. Uber, the whole world, is
Well,
unpredictable.
politics is unpredictable. It really is. And
They should take care of this before they deal with the Medicaid expansion. That way we know Uber's done, and then they can get to the other stuff.
Well, let's get it done
Good
tomorrow
luck.
night, huh?
exactly.
Audience, thank you very much. You can we see this at sunsentinel.com, and you can check the editorial page on Facebook. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Thank you all.
Fun.
Thanks.
Fantastic. That was just a lively
Thank you so
conversation.
much.
All of you.